We have unmatched natural resources in the state of Texas, unmatched. And it's, I feel the huge responsibility to be a steward of that, as do many Texans.
Break down real quick, and I think I know where you're going, but what do you mean by unmatched?
We have more species, whether they are game animals, non-game animals, protected animals, protected birds. It's just, we have such an abundance of natural resources that other states don't. Maybe Florida might match us in the amount of species that are available, whether you're a wildlife photographer, a bird watcher, a hunter, an angler, a paddler, a hiker, a biker. So in Texas, we're blessed. We're blessed with all of these natural resources, right? And I feel like, actually, I don't just feel like this. I mean, those resources belong to the people of the state of Texas.
Welcome to Winning Strategies Playbook, the podcast where we welcome business leaders, CEOs, and industry experts to discuss the rise to the top, building wealth, and real estate insights. Here's your host, Jeremy Spann.
Welcome to Winning Strategies Playbook. For more information on this podcast, you can go to www.myexperiencedrealtor.com. That's experience with an ED. So if your Marine needs some help spelling it like I do, myexperiencedrealtor.com, click on podcasts. You can download all of these episodes on Spotify, Amazon, iTunes, YouTube, and then you can learn more about our guests by clicking on the Read More. And I am excited and honored to have my guests here today, Danny and Chad. Danny and Chad, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just to set the stage of Texas Parks and Wildlife and Operation GameThief, I was honored a year and a half ago to be asked to be on the board. And I was really excited because I was trying to get off all the other boards I was on, and I really didn't want to be on any more boards, but I am passionate about what we're going to talk about today. And so that way the audience who can also be educated on what Texas Parks and Wildlife, as well as Operation GameThief is and means, this is going to be a super education. And if you're a hunter or a shooter, you're really going to be interested. So, gentlemen, before I start any of these, my father-in-law requires me to tell a joke. Even though I don't know why he requires me, he doesn't pay the bill to my production team here. But so I purposely do bad jokes. So I've got a joke that I think will fit in for today. Y'all ready?
Ready.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So there's this game warden.
Drum roll.
It's a game warden,
right? Of course. He hears a gunshot. He looks up on this hill. He sees this shiny truck, and he goes up there and sees the hunter, and he goes, "Man, that's a good-looking bear you shot." He goes, "Hey, thanks." And of course, Chad's looking at me right now. He's like, "Bears? We don't shoot bears in Texas. We don't have, it's too hot for bears in Texas. Let's say did have bears." So he sees this bear, and he goes, "Well, what'd you shoot him with?" And he brings out this really nice rifle. And he's like, "Man, that's great." And he goes, "Can I see your hunting license?" And the hunter goes, I didn't know I needed a hunting license." So the hunter gets arrested. The hunter gets his truck, his very expensive, nice new truck, confiscated. The gun confiscated. The now dead bear confiscated. And, okay. Year later, same game warden riding around. Same area. Here's another gunshot. I mean, he's always hearing gunshots, but same thing. Here's a gunshot. Looks up on the hill. Sees another very nice brand new truck. Drives up there. Sees the same hunter. And as soon as the game warden walks up, he goes, hey, look, I've got my hunting license. And he's like, "Man, that's fantastic." And he goes, "Yeah, and since y'all took my last truck, I got a new truck. And since you took my last rifle, I got a new rifle." And he goes, "Man, that's nice. But you don't have a bear stamp on your hunting license." So the hunter gets arrested. He gets his gun confiscated, the bear confiscated. and then he gets a truck confiscated. And so another year goes by. Game warden's out in the same area. At this point, he's like, "Hey, man, I'm getting quotas like anything with this bear hunter up here." So he sees the truck but doesn't hear a shot, and so he's like, "Man, it's early morning. I'm just going to go say hi to the guy and make sure he's got a bear stamp and make sure he's got the license because it's got to be the same guy." Drives up there and the hunter sees the game warden. He goes, "Hey, game warden, I got to tell you, I not only got the license, I've got the bear stamp. I am legit. I have learned. I'm tired of y'all confiscating my trucks and my guns and the bears and everything else." And the game warden's like, "Man, good for you. I'm just doing my job." And he goes, "Man, I know you are." And he goes, "Well, I didn't hear the shot. You got a bear here." And he goes, "Oh, yeah." And he goes, "Well, okay." And he says, "But I just got a question. How many times you shoot that bear?" And he goes, "Once." "Why?" And he goes, "Well, why does he have a gunshot in one hand, another gunshot in the other hand, and one right through the forehead?" And he goes, "Oh, well, I hit him with the spotlight. He put his paws up."
There you go.
So for the rest of the audience, he went to jail again for spotlighting when he's not supposed to.
Absolutely.
Oh man, yeah, we that's funny. I don't have a comment.
Yeah, I'll stay out of that one.
So to give a little background to the audience, Colonel Chad Jones, right? I want to talk about what it is that you do, your title, and what that means to the general public out here that's listening.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. My name's Chad Jones. I'm the colonel for law enforcement at Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. We have lots of divisions there: wildlife, fisheries, coastal fisheries, inland fisheries, things like that. But my role there is I am the head law enforcement officer for the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department Law Enforcement Game Wardens. So we have roughly 551 game wardens, 440 or so in the field, not counting supervisory staff. And as the head of that agency, I have staff that work with me, a lieutenant colonel and a chief, and then we have majors in the field, captains in the field, and field game wardens who most people see out there while they're hunting and fishing and enjoying the outdoors. But my role is to set the vision, the mission of that division, the law enforcement division, and how we interact with the public, and also things like this. Let people know what we do and why we're here and what we do for the state of Texas and conservation in general.
Okay. And then with old Danny Shaw over here, there is a support element for Texas Park and Wildlife called Operation GameThief. So, Danny, tell us about your title and what it is that you do.
Yeah, Jeremy, thank you for having us. Let me say that to start with. I mean, this is very important information, dear to our hearts. So I have a title of Executive Director of Operation GameThief, which means I work for you. It's a big title, but, I spent 33 years as a game warden. I was honored to do that. Almost 2 years ago today, I had an opportunity to move over to Operation GameThief. I was coming to the end of my law enforcement career, and this was a great opportunity for me to stay engaged in conservation. It's something I'm extremely passionate about. And so what I do, basically, I do a lot of outreach education, do a lot of talking to different organizations, just spreading the message of what Operation GameThief is, how important the citizens of Texas are to make Operation GameThief a success, and working very closely with Colonel Jones and the game wardens across the state of Texas.
And you were in law enforcement with the game wardens.
I was.
For how many years? 33
years.
Okay. And so you retired 2 years ago. Has that been your main career your whole life, or did you do anything prior to that?
I was a game warden for more than half my life, 33 years. But prior to that, I was a teacher and a coach. This career as a game warden, I don't want to say it came naturally. It was something that I had considered as an adult. We won't go through the process of the difficulties of becoming a game warden and getting in the Game Warden Academy. I was a teacher and a coach for about 5 years, then became a game warden in 1986.
1986. Chad, where were you in 1986?
Oh yeah, I was. What grade is 8 years old?
But you were a
He didn't say you're
21-year-old third grader.
Third grader. He's not saying you're old, Danny. He just said you're seasoned.
He's trying to set this up.
As a matter of fact, you were coaching him before you even went into the law enforcement part of this.
Probably some of his older brothers and sisters.
Now, Chad, what about you? You have you always been in law enforcement? Did you do anything before? What led you to your journey?
Yeah,
here?
I have a kind of an interesting story that I've shared quite often. I grew up in a small town called Broadus, Texas. It's around 150 people on a good day, if the sign is correct. It changes daily. But, I grew up in a town with 20 people in my homeroom class I graduated with that I knew my whole life. So it was a very close-knit community in Central East Texas. One thing I'll say is, we recently are working on some laws about allowing tracking with dogs in that area. And one thing I'll say about that lifestyle that I grew up in down there was, I was telling my uncle just yesterday, I said, hey, good news. Y'all are going to be able to track wounded deer with dogs again, but you have to have them on a leash. And he goes, man, that's great news. I said, well, the bad news is all the counties around you, they don't have to use a leash. And he said, well, why is that? I go, well, because the landowners felt like would give you a shot at it first to see how it goes and if you can handle them on a leash, which is kind of a joke. But yeah. I grew up in a hunting environment. It was surrounded by, timber company land and national forest. Hunting was a way of life. The game wardens came to the schools quite often. Like Danny said, I won't go through the whole process of what drew me to the game warden world as far as that, but I can tell you that early indoctrination or I would say that early introduction into what game wardens are and what they do. They were respected members of our community. People, I joke sometimes, people in my community might not like the game warden, but they dang sure respected them, but it's because of what they stood for, right? They stood for integrity and ethics, and they were part of their communities, and they tried to make a difference. And when I saw that as a young child in school, and when I was 8 years old, that instilled that in me. I said, you know what, maybe this guy's onto something. Maybe this is a career path that I want to go down. So, a few years later, we go on down the road there, and I got a ride along an internship. My first ride along was a game warden in East Texas, and he let me get in the boat with him and go see what they did, and I was hooked. He took me to go get me an internship. I did an unpaid internship through the college, which we still do today. It's called our volunteer program. We also have paid internships where students can get introduced to what we do and decide whether this is something for them. I went to Sam Houston State University, graduated with a criminal justice degree, and wound up becoming a probation officer for about 4 or 5 years, somewhere in there. Learned a lot about, just humans and how to interact with people and have some empathy and understanding, but also hold people accountable at the same time, because that's what they needed at that point in time to help guide them. And that really, as much as I look back on that and look and see how much of a challenge probation was for me being new out of college and 21 years old, it really did help set a path for me on understanding, people in general. And that's a huge thing of what we do with Texas Parks and Wildlife. We deal with people. It's not just black and white laws. We deal with people. Empathy is a part of that. I left there and I went to the Game Warden Training Center, to the Academy in Austin, and then got stationed in Brazos County, then went to Trinity County, became a lieutenant at the training center, worked for Danny Shaw here when he was a major at the training center. So I owe a lot to him as a mentor and a guide and on this journey as well. Because I left there, went to Uvalde to Southwest Texas as a captain for 5 years. I left Uvalde and went to Corpus Christi as a major of the Southern Texas coast, transferred back to East Texas where I was a major in East Texas, and then promoted to colonel. So I've been everywhere. Okay, I won't say that joke about Dallas. So I've been a lot of places in Texas. Got to see a lot of amazing cultures and how things work, and understand how game wardens can influence those future generations. And that's a huge step of what I do as a colonel, is impacting what's going to happen 5, 10, 15 years down the road for us, and what kind of values we're going to instill in those communities.
So how many years do you have with the game wardens now?
17.
17.
Mm-hmm.
That's relatively short and young to rise to the top of the organization.
Yes, sir. I've been told that.
Not the first time you've heard this.
No, it's not. And it comes. It's a mixed blessing, I guess, because there's challenges involved with that. And I know this is kind of geared toward the leadership, and I'll share that. Part of that walking into the room when you're 15 years younger than somebody, there's questions. Are you ready for this? The advice I was always given is you never find yourself in a room you don't belong in, right? There's a reason why you're there, even if you're behind the curve. Maybe I'm here to learn, maybe this is a struggle I'm supposed to be in to learn who I really am and what I'm going to do. So I always took those challenges just as that. It was a challenge for me, and I didn't internalize it. I made it into a positive. So you're correct. I did climb quickly. I did battle that you're too young for this position. And then if you prove yourself and you learn from mistakes and you're self-reflective, it turns into success in the long run.
So Danny, let me ask you, being a part of involved in Chad's career is naturally he wouldn't have ascended to this position if he wasn't a leader, right? And law enforcement's a lot like the military. You got to have great leadership, right? What would you say, just top of mind, was one of the top characteristics that Chad had that you knew this guy's going to the top?
He cares about people. He cares about the people that he works with. He cares about the people he supervises. He cares about the people of Texas, and he's very humble about what he's accomplished in 17 years. But Chad and I have had a lot of conversations, and for me, in the roles that I held as I moved through the ranks, it wasn't about how much time you have. It's about what you've done with the time you've been there. Chad never, what I saw in the colonel, and he deserves the position he's in, no matter what his age is, no matter what his tenure is with the agency. Jeremy, you've seen people that are in certain positions and all they can think about is what the next position is going to be. So they spend their time focusing on, how do I get from captain to major? What do I got to do? Who do I have to know to get to this next level? Chad, in my opinion, and I have the same philosophy, is if you're a captain, if you're the best captain there is, the door's going to open for the next step, and then you're going to become a major. Or if you're a major and you're the best major that you can be, and you learn and you mentor yourself, when the door opens, as it did for Chad, it was the natural next progression step, and he's prepared and ready.
And let me ask you, Chad, learning from a mentor like Danny, what would you say was the top characteristic that comes to mind as you were learning that, as you said, he played a great part of being a mentor for you coming up? What would you say is the number one characteristic that jumps out in top of mind with Danny?
Well, I hate to repeat what he said, but it's people orientation. It's caring about those that are around you and the people, to me, the most important part too is people you don't even know, it's that kind of care. And also, this may seem strange, but it's accountability. And you talked about that. We're a paramilitary organization, but when I talk about accountability, I don't talk about like him holding me accountable, even though he did. It's also learning that I have to hold myself accountable and learn from my own mistakes and how to fail forward, as the catchphrase is. And when I do make a mistake, don't be afraid. I tell this, and this is what I learned from Danny too. I tell this to a lot of young supervisors, game wardens coming up. Never be scared to ride out and face a challenge head on. One thing is, if there's a challenge and you're scared of it, raise your hand and grab it and take it and learn from it, because we're surrounded by people every day. I mean, that's my success. And I know it sounds like a cliche, but I'm not very good at what I do sometimes, but I'm surrounded by people that can give me advice. And so a collective wisdom is what I like to say. There's a collective wisdom around me of 100 years worth of experience that I can draw on and make the best decision based off my personal experiences and those around me. And that's one thing Danny taught me early on. I was a very young lieutenant. I promoted quickly. I was in an academy setting that was fast-paced. My opinion always counted. Now, we may not do what my thought we should do, of course.
I think that's life in general, right?
But isn't that such a valuable lesson too? Because you know, the one thing I would say about Danny is he was always open to that question, and I've stole that leadership model from him. I would say is to be able to say and sit in a chair and be like, okay, we don't agree on this, but tell me why. Tell me what your thought is on this. And he never was bashful about explaining things to me. I'm that guy. It's like, you know, people who've worked with me in the past go, hey, Chad's not questioning why you did it. He just wants to know exactly how it worked. How'd you come up with this? What in your life pushed you to that decision? What 3 things happened yesterday maybe that pushed you in a different direction than you were yesterday? I'm huge on processes. And for me, sometimes it's not about getting to point E. It's about A, B, C, and D that I'm super impressed with on how we meld as a team and get things done. I learned that at the academy, though. There was, 6 of us, and you had to do that. You had to work together. So it kind of forced me into that role early on and kind of accelerated that learning curve.
And I think that one of the things that the public may not know or realize about another unique feature of y'all in law enforcement is y'all have lots of backup, right? I mean, y'all are literally like a Lone Ranger out there on your own many a times where the closest backup is what, 30 minutes away?
Oh, yeah, or sometimes more, especially at West Texas. I mean, you may be the only person out after a certain time frame. So, no, I appreciate that question. You know, we get that a lot. We have police officers who tell us all the time, sheriff's deputies, like, I'd never do your job because you're always alone and everybody has a gun, right? I always say, hey, I have the upper hand because I know that when I go in there. I mean, game wardens are uniquely trained, I think, in such a we get some of the best training. We have our own training center. We get some of the best training in the nation. We have lieutenants coming from Florida in a couple of weeks to see how we do things. So we're starting a lieutenant exchange program. And the reason I bring that up is kind of off base of being alone. But the thing is what we do here in Texas is not insular. We also learn from Florida. We learn from California. We learn from Ohio. We're shipping that knowledge out that we learn too, because that's what we talk about with care, right? We care about everybody, not just what we have in our immediate reach. And I go back to that to say that's what keeps us safe in our communities, though, is we're part of our communities. We understand that. Game wardens understand what I just said. It's not about us. It's not just about Texas game wardens. You know, I'll remember when I left Brazos County, I was in College Station. When I was leaving, I talked to a deputy. He was a tenured deputy, 25, 30 years on. And it meant the world to me that he was a little upset that I was leaving because he said, every time I got a really hairy call, you'll know what that means, being a prior detective, right? Yeah. When I got something kind of scary, he goes, I'll always calm down because you were either waiting on the road for me to get there or you were there within 5 minutes of me showing up. And what that does is I remember one night being on a deserted road by myself in the middle of nowhere, and I made a stop, and the deputies knew who this person was, and I didn't answer the radio twice because I was dealing with a situation. And then within 10 minutes, I had 4 deputies there. And that's the difference. When you work together and everybody's on that team and they know that you truly care for them, they'll come running and they'll show up. And that's how game wardens have been successful on 2 levels. We're usually extremely well at talking our way out of situations, verbal judo. We're used to dealing with, not every 100 drinks, don't get me wrong, but we're used to being in that camp with 15 people who are halfway through a bottle, enjoying themselves and giving you jokes and hard times, right? So we know how to thrive in that situation. And most of those people that we're checking are members of the community we live in. So they care about us too, because we've already shown them that we'll show up in their time of need. So we don't always get the pushback that maybe some of the other agencies would get.
Now, Danny, what would you say are some of the common myths, right? Because I think that law enforcement, and especially as we've seen in the last year, some very radical opinions towards law enforcement in general, is a lot of people, I think, don't understand law enforcement, what its function is. They go, well, you're carrying AR-15s and blah, blah, blah. Well, they don't understand, look, we're not out there to go start wars or finish wars. We're out there to be a part of that community. And that, like as a Marine, you send me into combat, my job is to kill the enemy, right? And I better be really good at my job or the enemy's going to kill me. Law enforcement's different. Well, realize the best shift you can have is the shift that you didn't have to put your hands on anybody or have to hurt anybody in the performance of your job, let alone be in a shooting, right? And so people have a misconception of, they think all these cops are out there doing this, blah, 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 and it's not the case. But I think even game wardens, I mean, I've learned so much, from y'all, especially Danny, I'll ask dumb questions all the time. He's like, where did you come up with that? Because I think there's a little bit of an enigma that surrounds game wardens. But for the general audience, like what would you say are a couple of these myths on game wardens that you hear all the time and you go, oh, all right, I'm going to have this conversation for the 100th time this year?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think what you alluded to and what Chad's already alluded to is game wardens embed themselves in their communities, and they become parts of their communities. A lot of game wardens that are married, whether it's their husband or their wife, they're school teachers or they're doctors in the community, and so you hear that phrase, community-oriented policing. I want to say that Texas game wardens invented that, and this leads into a lot of the things I want to talk to the audience about Operation GameThief is. Let me just throw some numbers out there at you and see if they stick. But, Chad said, got 440 game wardens across the state of Texas. And that sounds like a lot. But let's consider the population in Texas now is 28 million and climbing. It's probably at 29 million as we're here today. There's 254 counties. There's 262,000 square miles of land. There's 4 million acres of salt water. There's 1.7 million acres of fresh water. There's 80,000 miles of rivers and streams to protect. 367 miles of coastline. Now, when you hear that or you listen to that and you think back on it, you're thinking, good Lord, how do they do it? And I'll say this. I mean, to me, game wardens are heroes, but they're not superheroes. And so, game wardens rely on relationships, right? I mean, I don't care what you do. It's all about relationships. It's Chad and I have talked about that. You and I have talked about that. It's about relationships. And again, Chad made some references to how game wardens know how to handle this situation. Game wardens care about people. They care about the resources of Texas. They can talk to someone who is the vice president of the United States that's quail hunting, down to the pipe fitter or any level of economics, race. It doesn't matter because game wardens care about people. That's one thing I really believe, that the heroes that came before us, that we stepped on their shoulders to get where we were, built. And it was always in me it was my responsibility to carry that on. And Chad and I were at the academy together, and we spent a lot of time. It was one of the best parts of my career because it was impacting new hires, new employees. You're indoctrinating them into your philosophy, the way you do business, the way you treat people. And so it's about leaving a place better than you found it. And remembering that what you do when you're wearing that uniform in Beaumont today reflects on the guy or gal in Alpine tomorrow. It's just that simple. And if you keep that in your mind, so I may not have answered your question, but that's why I believe game wardens are so successful, because of the community, the hunting, the angling, the buy-in that they get from people who participate in outdoor activities. Because when they approach you, they're going to approach you with the attitude of a friend. They want to communicate with you. They want to answer your questions. They want to teach you. You will not see a game warden. I've never seen a game warden not go up to a group of individuals where there might be mother, father, and son or daughter. And who is the first person, Colonel, that game warden is going to go speak to?
Yeah, well, they'd speak to the mother first, always. So, building off that, I say that, we're in a time, let's not get into that. I'll say, having watched game wardens over time, I will say a key element to that I've noticed is just what Danny's saying. It's respect of the people that you're dealing with. It's understanding tradition. It's understanding, I'll just put it pretty simple. Good manners go a long way. It helps my kids in school. It helps game wardens in their jobs every day. Texas has been built around that forever. We're the friendly state, right? Game wardens follow that same kind of model. Danny built off that a little bit. I was just at the academy the other day, and, I always try to instill that in the cadets. And we've talked about community. We've talked about everything. And, you'll notice he did say that. One thing that I did tell him, one thing that I've always seen happen as a game warden, I don't use always very often, but I'll use always in this. I can't name the number of people that I've actually taken and booked into a county jail for felonies or anything else, serious crimes, that when I was walking out of the door, they didn't say, Mr. Jones, I'm going to tell everybody I know about you. And you get a little worried. You're like, well, what are they going to tell everybody? And they'll say, you treated me like a human being. And I'm going to tell you today, because of that, I'm going to let everybody I know that you're a good, fair person. You're firm, you're fair, and consistent. I used to train horses for a living, not comparing people to that, but I'll tell you, firm, fair, and consistent goes a long way in your communities. Because you're across the board the same way. It doesn't matter what your status in life is. We're going to treat you like a human.
So I had after I had posted it on my social media that I was really excited about being on the board, and and man, I can't tell you how many people reached out and they went, man, we always knew you were connected, but man, you got on their board? Like, holy cow. And I was like, well, they heard I'm just really good at raising a lot of money. It's amazing how many people write a check just as long as I'll stop talking. And but one friend of mine, and I'll leave him nameless, goes, well, I don't like game wardens. And I said, well, man, I mean, I grew up in the country, and I grew up hunting in East Texas on Type 2 land, right? So for the audience, Type 2 is a permit of it's land you can go hunt on. You don't have to have a lease, but you have to have a specific permit to be able to go out there. So you would encounter, and game wardens, and I mean, and of course, when I was young growing up, 16, 17 years old, that was a long time ago. That was many, many decades ago. Game wardens were always professional then. And that's another reason why I was excited to get an invitation to be on this board, because I was like, so I was curious. It's like, man, because there's always the one-off, right? There's always that one person that, like I said, it only takes one to make 99 look bad out of 100. And I says, well, man, I'm curious. Tell me about your experience. And I says, walk me through. And he goes, well, he was arresting me on my boat. And of course, I'm sitting there thinking, I was like, well, were you out fishing? You not have a license? And he goes, no, I was out skiing with my buddies. Of course, I automatically know where this is going, right? And I said, well, what happened? And he goes, well, I was, I'd had a couple of drinks. I said, man, I've known you a long time. I know the difference between a couple and a couple. And he was just like, well, I just thought, and by the way, you didn't realize, not only can you get a DWI, driving while intoxicated, you can get a BWI, boating while intoxicated. Actually, you can get an AWI. And I don't know if people realize that, which is, or I can't remember FWI, what it is, flying while intoxicated, right? And knowing this friend, and he's a good guy, but I know when he drinks, he can get a bit belligerent. And he said, well, I just shouldn't have got arrested and blah, blah. And I said, well, buddy, we'll just call him Buddy. His name's not Buddy, but he's my buddy. I said, were you intoxicated? And he goes, well, and I was like, well, you and I, we had some drinks together before. And, I just remember is you generally become the smartest person in the room that likes to earn their way into situations. And when I say earn your way into situations, I mean earn their way into situations. Right. So it was kind of funny, as that was the only negative story I've heard on game wardens. And I was like, that wasn't the game warden in that deal. And that was you talked yourself into the situation, right?
No.
And so what's the funniest myth that you hear people come up and will ask you and say, is it true that cane wardens can, or whatever that you hear, and you just go,
Yeah, well, I would just say pop up out of the ground. I know that sounds odd, but we cannot teleport. I'll just say that, okay? But there's many a hunter who's literally fell almost out of a stand or a boat or a bush because all of a sudden they get a tap on the shoulder and they're like, oh, geez, where did you come from? I've actually stood in the middle of fishing camps before for people that were trespassing, and they're breaking down a camp for 15 minutes, and I'm literally just standing there in full uniform holding a silver ticket book, and I just don't move and watch them for 15 minutes before somebody goes, holy geez. I mean, that's their fault. That ain't mine.
Hey,
but
yeah. I just love your patience that you can stand there for 15 minutes just walking
Well,
like, how long is it going to take them?
I don't want to give
notice I'm
away
standing here?
trade secrets.
Collecting intelligence.
Yeah. I didn't want to say that, but then I didn't want to give away the trade
This
secrets.
was going to be 2 citations, but we're up to 20 now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't want to have to get a shovel and find the fish. I'll just wait for them to get them.
So when did Operation GameThief, or what we'll call for the intents and purposes here, OGT, get started?
So OGT was created in 1981 by the Texas legislature. Speaker of the House, Gib Lewis, who is a board member, initiated that and pushed it through. So we're now in our 40th year of existence. At the time, and again, I go back to the numbers I threw out at you, Jeremy, and Chad knows this, that, Operation GameThief is service to the people of the state. And it's a tip line, a hotline, whatever you want to call it, for people to report violations that they witness of natural resource law. And again, like we talked about, I mean, game wardens can't be everywhere at once, even though, as the Colonel explained, people think you can, and you don't pop up out of the ground and things like that. So, we have unmatched natural resources in the state of Texas, unmatched, and it's I feel the huge responsibility to be a steward of that, as do many Texans.
Break down real quick, and I think I know where you're going, but what do you mean by unmatched?
We have more species, whether they are game animals, non-game animals, protected animals, protected birds. It's just, we have such an abundance of natural resources that other states don't. Maybe Florida might match us in the amount of species that are available, whether you're a wildlife photographer, a bird watcher, a hunter, an angler, a paddler, a hiker, a biker. So in Texas, we're blessed. We're blessed with all of these natural resources, right? And I feel like, actually, I don't just feel like this. I mean, those resources belong to the people of the state of Texas. They do. We have ownership in that. And I feel it's my duty to do everything I can to help protect and conserve those for my kids and my grandkids. I know I look really young, but I have some grandkids.
I was about to say, is that one gray hair I see?
No, I thought I got that this morning. But you just took me right off track. But no, in unmatched, that's what I mean. I mean, we just have a diverse, abundant wildlife population across the state of Texas. Now, why do we have that? Well, I think one of the reasons is because Texans believe so strongly in protection of those resources and take it personally. And that's why I was so fortunate to move into my new role and work, very symbiotically with the law enforcement division that I left, and provide that tool for people to be involved and to be, as I like to tell it, intentionally engaged. You've got to be intentionally engaged. And that's communities, that's individuals, that's organizations. And so, OGT, we partner with a lot of different organizations. And again, I want to make sure people hear me when I say that we're not just concerned about hunters and anglers. We're very concerned. They're a core constituency because there are a lot of them, and they're recreational.
Describe for the audience an angler. I know what that means, but
so either a saltwater fisherman or a freshwater fisherman. And again, once again, we have 4 million surface acres of saltwater, and we have 1.7 million acres of freshwater. But wildlife knows no boundaries. And so 440 game wardens need your help. They need your eyes. We can talk a little bit whenever you want to just about the changing dynamics of the role. And I can let the Colonel talk about the changing dynamics of wildlife crimes in the state of Texas. And you and I have talked about some of those. But they're expanding, and people say, well, what do you mean a wildlife crime? Somebody shooting a deer off the road? Well, yeah, sure, that's a wildlife crime. But when organizations are trafficking turtles from Texas and sending them to Asia, now we're on a different plane. We're in a different realm. When game wardens are arresting people at the DFW airport for smuggling in frozen hummingbirds, that's a different plane. Theft of alligator eggs. So there's this huge changing dynamic that has occurred over the last, maybe not occurred, but has come to the forefront over the last 10, 12 years, that now we're highly and keenly aware of, and how that is impacting our state. And I don't think a lot of people understand that. Game wardens are also responsible for the commercial fishing industries in Texas, shrimping, oystering, things like that. And again, I don't want to speak for the Colonel, but I'm interested in that because OGT's interested in that, because OGT wants to provide a service for the protection of all the natural resources of Texas, not a few species, not just some fish and some birds, all of the resources.
And just for the audience, just to wrap their head around this, is when you have 440 game wardens that are in the field in 254 counties, right? State of Texas, that is on average less than 2 game wardens per county. And each county is roughly on average square miles, 40 square miles, 50 square miles, I'm trying to think of what that number would be, but
on average, some 1,200
square miles.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a lot of territory with very limited resources. And just so the audience understands what Danny's talking about, is it's not just shooting deer and catching fish. And it's not just saltwater fish and oysters. It's go in and just start rattling off some of the species that y'all are engaging in criminal investigations that it would blow their mind to hear that this is what you're investigating.
Yeah, the interesting part is, I'll throw you a curveball: succulents, which is cactus. People don't think about that. When I first started going out to West Texas and got introduced as a game warden to what we call border operations, which is where we were going to do our part as law enforcement, we also do conservation work. And the state of Texas was passing laws to make it illegal to remove cactus from someone else's property. And that's because, and I know this seems strange, but the thing is California had a big move on this before we ever got here, because they realize, as we do, that is an ecosystem, right? So the plants, the animals, other plants, the soil status, everything relies on everything, right? So I think, Danny, what I hear him talk a lot about is ecosystems, is how I look at it. So that's one. I can't tell you how many. I don't have the numbers. I just had a meeting with my support services special operations division yesterday, and I was talking to the CID, our undercover unit, and our overt unit, and the cases that they help other states work. So it's not just, I want to point that out too, that OGT actually helps with that. People can call into this hotline when their neighbor brings a black bear from California or a wolf from California or an endangered species from Wyoming into Texas. We're also involved in that as well. So a lot of those are, the Texas tortoise. We don't get a lot of cases on that, but the Texas tortoise is a protected animal here in Texas. People pick them up. They want to take them home. I mean, when you remove one, then you've just impacted an entire system, and we have to know the gravity of that. And I agree with Danny on that, and I know it's not, for me, it's not a strange place to go, but I talked about this earlier in my career as a colonel. When I was a young kid going to church, one of the first things I remember in Genesis, it talks about it's our responsibility to take care of the plants and the animals and the earth and everything. I took it pretty serious. You see what I do today? Yeah. It's all of our responsibilities to make sure that these resources are protected. A higher calling, if you call it that, or just for, like you said, conservation for future generations, which is our motto. But in that, he pointed to that, and I appreciate y'all bringing that up. We have port of entry inspections going on. For port of entries, that's on our Mexico border, our land border. Port of entry inspections in airports. It's multifaceted. We have a long-range vessel that goes out past 9 nautical miles in the Gulf of Mexico that catches Mexican lanchas, which is boats full of fishermen who put long lines and gill nets out and indiscriminately catch everything in the Gulf of Mexico. And for that, you're impacting an international trade. So that also affects not only sports fishermen, but what people eat and how we survive. Oysters are huge for us in Texas. We started out as the Fish and Oyster Commission, correct, Danny?
That's correct.
For a reason, because we have so much water. Fishing, oysters are a huge part of an economy in Texas. And we work diligently to make sure that that's safe for consumption. That's the FDA's job. What we do is make sure that these oysters don't come out of prohibited waters where they could make someone sick. We make sure that they stay within their limits. We make sure that they're not undersized. This is all for growth of an industry. So we get involved in that a lot of times too, in that commercial side of things. But, you asked for a surprising one. I would say that's a surprising one. When when the red ear sliders disappear and there's no cactus in West Texas, and the coyotes are gone, then people start noticing. The reason they don't cry now is because Texas game wardens are out there every day, and they're working with the public to make sure that we keep this for everyone.
And that's real important, I think, for the audience to understand how much more important that is today. One, the population is significantly higher than it was 10 years ago versus 20 years ago versus 30, 40, 50, even 100 years ago, right? And then on top of that, the population in Texas is growing extremely fast. I mean, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex was expected to grow by 1 million people just between 2020 and 2030. And now, being in a post-pandemic world, we have a lot more migration of people that are coming here. Well, here's the thing. People still have to have the basics of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Food, shelter, security. Well, all right, when your population is getting really big, you can't just train more law enforcement officers overnight. And especially with the adversity we're having to live with today. And I think that's, in my opinion, we don't have to step on that landmine, but in my opinion, because I'm retired from law enforcement, I can say whatever I want, is that I think a lot of that's media driven, right? But it's important because people need to feel safe. But people need to have shelter. And me working in real estate, we have a massive housing shortage where it's causing people to overbid on houses, which is climbing the rates of buying a house. Buying a house in Fort Worth, you can't even buy a dope house for $150,000 anymore. Right. And if you do, it's because it comes with the dope dealer, right? And then now you've got food. Mm-hmm. Well, food is not just something that just magically comes out of a machine like in the future on the Jetsons or anything. Right? I mean, everything goes into I really like this ecosystem analogy because, look, just like what we're seeing I've got a house in Colorado and they're getting they just passed a bill. They're trying to get some wolves relieved out in the wilderness, and they don't understand it's because, look, nature is nature, right? Regardless of how many smartphones and devices and everything else we have, guess what? We all used to not wear clothes and run around naked, fighting dinosaurs and everything else back in the day, right? There's still a primitive nature to us, and there's still a way systems have to engage and work in order just to feed this population. And we've got deer on Colorado that are just everywhere. As a matter of fact, this year alone, I bet you it's been at least 6 times where a lot of these roads, you're out in the middle of nowhere and it's 2-lane and it's backed up a mile. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? And I'll just drive around it and I get up there and it's a lot of tourists. Well, they hit a deer, and the deer, man, it's sitting there. And I'm like, has anybody, what are y'all doing? Well, they can't call anybody because there's no cell phone signal and you're in the middle of nowhere and you're holding up traffic for a mile. So I take out my pistol. I'm putting the deer out of its misery. I'm not going to sit there and let it suffer. And I drag it off the side of the road and get in my truck and go call game warden. Hey, just let you know. He's like, well, I think that's the 5th one we've gotten out there today, But if they don't bring in something that's going to help thin out the deer population, then you're going to have a lot more accidents. And I always tell people, when you're driving in Colorado, it ain't the deer. You hit a deer, it's going to mess up your vehicle. You hit an elk, it's going to mess you up.
Right? Problem.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, but it is important to preserve these ecosystems, because it's also what adds to the, like you said, Danny, is the uniqueness of Texas that has so many more different species and environments. And Texas is big. I mean, hell, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex alone is bigger than some states, right? And so we have to be able to do this. So with the relationship with, because I sit here, and as a matter of fact, when you're describing some of these investigations, I remember my workload as a detective. When I first promoted, I was baby detective. I was working in general assignments, and I was getting between, this is not an exaggeration, 15, 20 new cases a day. Of like, man, how at that point, it just becomes a management system of what can I solve? What's the closest alligator to the boat, the lowest hanging fruit, because I'm just not going to have time to get it. And in hearing you describe all of these different aspects, from the trafficking of species in or out, and all this square miles of everything, and just how port of entry, all the complexity of that, when you have less than 2 game wardens per county on average to handle all this, how overwhelming is that for the game wardens when you're just, it's never going to be a balanced load that you can carry. Right?
No, and I appreciate that question. Danny and I talked about that on the trip up here. Your game wardens are asking me daily, what's your plan, Colonel? Are you going to get more game wardens? What are you going to do to lighten our load a little? I lean on our managers a lot. Our captains out in the field carry a massive weight for conservation in Texas, and they help these game wardens through their life experiences. As you said, since I've become a colonel, I have used that saying more in a week than I ever used in my life. The alligator closest to the boat. We're in a constant state sometimes of what is the closest alligator. Sometimes you have 4 of them and you got to wrestle them all at once, right? Captains help with that. But strategically, yes, one or 2 things. I either have to work the game wardens I have today more and give them more money, which I don't have, that I will have to ask for, or I ask for more game wardens and try to disperse that load and have more game wardens in counties where the activity is. So we have gotten specialized in some areas, like port of entry inspections. We're looking at that, like how do we specialize in that and make the greatest impact? So we're using a lot of statistics, a lot of numbers now, a lot of metrics to decide, okay, let's look at this rationally instead of just showing up every time we get a call. How can we schedule it, make an impact? You've been through that in your law enforcement career. Numbers, people like to see numbers. That's what we're doing at the airports. We partner with U.S. Fish and Wildlife out of New Mexico as their main supervisor. Philip Land, he works great with us. I mean, we are constantly, I think we have U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service down on the coast doing Operation Osprey, as we call it, which is a border operation based on fisheries. And they're out there today checking boats for both federal. So, I mean, I'll throw that in there. That's something we hadn't talked about. Like I was talking about the oyster boats and the shrimp boats, right? I mean, when I was on the coast, I had a captain approach me. There again, a captain trying to figure out how to lighten that load. And I'll give you kind of an example of what we're talking about. Is they decided to, through relationships, to get Border Patrol and the Coast Guard together with a helicopter with FLIR capabilities and magnification capabilities, and they would go out and check oyster boats. The Coast Guard would check the boat for all the documents that they needed. Border Patrol would check for illegal immigrants working on the boat. They were picking up felons and people that were dangerous to be in Texas. And we were doing our job of checking licenses and oysters and everything else. And then if say there was a violation, and say we had a felon from Mexico that has forbidden entry into Texas, we have a Marine Tactical Operations Group boat that would swoop in, pick that person up, take them to shore. All at the same time, a helicopter is taking pictures of oyster boats that are dumping oysters on us that were illegal before we can get to them. So we have the evidence recorded. That's just one boat. And I've got, 6 game warden boats out there where that same, I mean, it's just a huge operation, and we have to do it as smartly as we can. So we rely heavily on our partners. I keep pointing to OGT, but it's the same aspect. It's the same principle, right? I'm using the federal government. We're partnering with the federal government. We're partnering with local law enforcement. We're partnering with our ports. I don't know that people know we do that too. We do port security as well. The military uploads and offloads boats in the port of Corpus Christi and in Galveston. We have submarines that come in that we escort in. We have radio detective units on game warden boats that can pick up radioactive material on vessels that are coming through the ship channel. There's just so much that we do to add to our main goal of conservation law enforcement. So we add that to it because it is the protection of the people of the state of Texas. But in doing that, we run into, and most of all that we're doing, it's because we're out there doing conservation work, and that's just secondary things that we run into. And that's the reason we have the law enforcement.
Yeah, it is, and I don't want to interrupt you because you're exactly right. But if I may, I'd like to ask you a question just because you have experience in this. So when you went to work as an officer, you probably started as a patrolman. So if you were, let's say, a 3-year patrolman, and they came to you and said, "Hey, Jeremy, I'm going to also give you 4 investigations to work on, but you still got to patrol the Southeast," what would you have said?
What?
He does this to me all the time.
Yeah, like, huh?
So
literally.
So as Chad's explaining this, and I want everybody to understand that. So as we talk about lack of personnel and stretching and miles to patrol and doing it by yourself, game wardens are expected to conduct routine patrol, but then they may run into something that requires an investigation. Well, they can't call in investigators to investigate every incident. They have to do it themselves. And that just adds, as you know, it's another layer of responsibility. And so you wake up every morning and you're like, "Oh man, I need to go patrol the west side of the county because it's deer season, but I got these 2 deer that were killed that I'm investigating. Where do I go and what do I do?" And so once again, I say that the public has to intentionally engage and help because I know they care. I just don't think they know. I don't think they know the depth and the breadth of, people that are stealing their resources. And that's what they're doing.
So how do we educate them?
I hope this is a part of opening a dialogue. Operation GameThief, we have a statewide outreach education trailer that we get in front of probably 150 to 200,000 Texans a year. It's curated, and I used that word the other day, and it's Captain retired Scott Haney actually pulls that around, as you well know. And when I said he was the curator, I got some really funny looks, and Carter Smith said that Scott kind of leaned over to somebody and said, "What's a curator?" Now, I don't think that truly happened because he's an intelligent man. But so we utilize that. We've got a brand new one. We got a 38-foot trailer. And I would like to say before I get off that, again, we've talked about partnerships. And so we had several other organizations that partnered with us to purchase the trailer, to get it outfitted, and to get it on the road so we could start spreading the message. And Coastal Conservation Association, Quail Coalition, Safari Club International, Sabine River Authority want to partner with us. I mean, they're great supporters of conservation. Something we haven't even talked about here it's popped in my head 3 or 4 times. If I don't shout it out, I won't remember it. but it's about environmental crimes. Game wardens investigate environmental crimes. Horrible decimation to fisheries and things people dump in. And so that's, think about that. Just adds another. That's another. Oh my God, environmental crimes too. So yes, I mean, the workload is enormous. And I really think, again, your question was, how do we get that out there? But we get out in front of as many people as we can. We tell the story, answer questions. I've taken it upon myself to start reaching out to groups and organizations that we haven't before. And I'll throw a group out there. You may have never heard of them, but they're the Master Naturalists of Texas. And I was fortunate. I worked with a game warden that was at headquarters that was actually a master naturalist. And he actually wrote part of their curriculum. They have a curriculum. You have to go through a curriculum. When I started thinking about assuming this role, I tried to do a little bit of research. And so I went to a website, Master Naturalist, pops up. I read their mission statement. Their mission statement's about conservation. They care about conservation. They care about land fragmentation. They care about habitat restoration. They do all these things to benefit the wild things that run and roam in Texas. So in my mind, we're connected. That's what we care about. Are they hunters or anglers? Not most of them, but they really care about conservation. The Whooping Crane Society. What a great organization. If you want to talk some passionate people, talk to the Whooping Crane Society. They're extremely passionate about conservation. And so there's all these different organizations that I'm trying to get in front of. I'm trying to spread the message of Operation GameThief and how we can serve the people of Texas and how we could benefit their organizations by partnering together to get their message out and to get my message out and get our message out. I think that's how you have to do it. I think you just have to, again, I said it earlier, it's all about relationships. You've got to develop those relationships with people. And I know in the past, you have some that are non-hunters and non-anglers. We use the term consumptive and non-consumptive. A consumptive person would be an angler or a hunter that is taking a resource. Non-consumptive would be a master naturalist, Whooping Crane Society. We all care about conservation. We all care about it. And at the end of the day, I think if we can continue to pull together, and I've said this a lot, it's a team sport. Conservation's a team sport. We all have to work together. And in the past, there's been some headbutting, if you want to call it, between consumptive and non-consumptive. I want to try to break some of those barriers down because at the end of the day, we all care about conservation. Whether it's we need to protect the cactus, as the Colonel explained, it can screw up the ecosystem. Whether it's the hummingbirds, it's all those things. And so I hope I answered your question, but it's about getting our message out to the broadest spectrum of individuals, communities, and organizations that we can. I'm willing to come speak anytime to any group to spread what OGT means to Texans. And again, we're a service organization. We want to provide a service with honesty and integrity and confidentiality.
Yeah. And that when you had said, hey, what would you do if you were a 3-year patrol officer? Now you're handed 4 investigations man, it really makes me think of how spoiled I was in Fort Worth PD, right? Because depending on what crime it is, I might call a detective. If it's a robbery, I'd call a robbery detective. Sex crime, call a sex crime detective. Homicide, call a homicide detective, right? And it had, if it's a barricaded person, you call the SWAT team. There's just all these resources where you're a one-man marching band when you're a game warden out there, and you have all these things, and that's why OGT is so important in the relationship of helping with that education on conservation, So if you had to, and this will probably be a difficult question to answer, mainly because there's so many answers you'd want to give to it. But if somebody was going to be educated on, whether you came and talked to their group, or they came to the trailer that is on display, or whatever number of reasons is, what would you say is the number one thing you want a person that didn't know about all this to leave with? Right? What would you say is one thing you're like, man, if they just leave with this, that's going to help our mission?
That is a tough question. I let me answer it like this, and it may not be the answer to the question, but I've said this before, and I said, I believe that the wild places and wild things in Texas that we benefit from improve our quality of life. And let me tell you, I guess maybe as I've grown and matured, I do hunt, I do fish. I love to bird watch, and I love to sit on my back deck and watch deer and turkey and dove and hummingbirds and songbirds, and game wardens protect every one of those species based on what they do every day. They are protecting every one of those species. And so, because I believe, here's why I believe it improves our quality of life. And that's, you don't hunt, fish, or participate in the activities I described to you unless you're participating with family members or friends. You do that as with the closest people most of the time. You do that with the closest people that you know. And it's about the experience. I got a real quick story, and so I've learned now. I was fishing in Baffin Bay with a retired captain and another game warden. And being the very light-footed person that I am, we were drifting and we were fishing, and I was moving around the boat, and I stepped wrong on the gunnel of the boat, the side of the boat, and fell overboard. Now, I didn't fall completely overboard because my knees got hung up on the gunnel. And so if you can picture, from my knees to my feet were in the boat, and the rest of me was underwater. Now, I had my cell phone in my pocket, of course. Why would you put that in a watertight bag? You might want to answer an email. And as my head popped up the first time, I look, and they're just standing there laughing. They've actually stopped fishing because I'm disturbing the water, and they're laughing. And after about, seemed like a minute and a half, I'm thinking, you guys can help me? I'm drowning here. I mean, I don't have the abs I used to have, right? I'm having a hard time keeping my head above water. And so one of them reaches over and flips my foot and just throws me out of the boat. Well, okay, I'm in Baffin Bay, right? We're fishing in 2 feet of water. So
I'm drowning. Stand up.
As I stand up and realize, but what my point is, even today, which has been 4 years from now, we don't remember how many fish we caught.
Yeah.
It didn't even matter. We remembered those things that happen with those people you care about, and the things you will remember 10 years from now. You won't remember how many dove you killed or how many fish you caught or what that deer was you killed, but you do remember how you continue to build those relationships with people you care about. That's why I think it's so critical. It stirs me inside to now realize that's what you do. And like the Colonel said, that's how I grew up. I grew up with my father and my uncle and my cousins and my brothers, and the things that I learned doing that, it helped me in life. And so it wasn't just about the activity, but without the protection of the resources,
you wouldn't have the activity.
I would not have been able to do it.
Yeah.
And so that's the critical tie nature that we're talking about, is these are privileges, right? These are privileges. They can be taken away from us. They can be, but we can also control the illegal theft of those resources. And that's what it is. Don't make the mistake. I don't want the audience to make the mistake that a hunter is hunting dove. And I'm just giving this is just an example. And the bag limit's 15, and he's like me, he's not good at math, and he kills 16. And the game warden comes along, they check him, and you're over the bag limit. It's either educational time or it's a citation. Those aren't the people I'm talking about. Again, I want to really, really hammer, it's these individuals and it's these criminal organizations that are intentionally stealing millions and millions of dollars of our resources in Texas. And they're doing it, and it's a difficult thing to stop without the help of the general public in Texas, because they see it. They may not know what they're seeing at the time. We haven't even talked about the exotic pet trade and things that are coming in and out. And that's another thing. When you look at Florida, and I think it's the anacondas.
The ball python. We're working on that bill right now in the Texas legislature. Stormy King, who's our wildlife assistant commander, came up with that to present to the Texas legislature in order to protect the to put the ball python back on the exotic list. It had been moved on a taxonomy based off science. And that's what's overrun Florida right now. So people don't understand that sometimes, that, it's a python that's sold in a pet store, but if we take it off of that list, then you wind up like Florida, where you have Python Hunters 101 TV shows, right? And that we can't afford that because it affects our native species. I think they've even noticed the turtle populations, the alligator populations, the bird populations are declining in the Florida Everglades and the Florida areas because of introduction of lizards and snakes that don't belong there. And it's a huge impact. Kind of building off what you said too, I want to make it very clear. One of the groups that we're having a difficult time, I think, as Texas game wardens getting out to, are the people who are valuable to us as well. I noticed when Danny and I was sitting up front in the lounge, and you have that huge window, and it's overlooking that park with the grass, with a park bench. People who live in this city that go out there, see, nature is relative to where you live. So if I show Danny a picture maybe of a basketball court with 3 trees around it, maybe he doesn't see nature. But the kid that goes out there every day, sits against the fence and watches the birds and squirrels play in those trees, that's nature to them. And I understand that as a colonel, and that's what I'm trying to have our game wardens understand too, that park out there could be a nature preserve for some citizen here in Fort Worth. But if not for Texas game wardens, not for OGT and organizations like that, SRA, CCA, you wouldn't be able to sit in that park possibly and see a butterfly or see a bird or have clean air blow by or go down to a stream and just enjoy a day watching fish, even if you're not fishing. If not for Texas game wardens going out every day and patrolling, if not for Texas Parks and Wildlife having biologists that do studies through science-based laws and then put those into acts, game wardens wouldn't be here to enforce it, and we wouldn't have this. And it's vitally important to what we do, not just for hunting and fishing, but for the person that stops on the side of the road to snap that sunset picture, and you have the beautiful trees and the grass and the birds and the bugs. If not for Texas game wardens, that might not exist.
So if I had to understand and sum up the role of what game wardens and OGT does, is it's there to help ensure the balance of ecosystems.
On a broader term, yes.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the, what do you say? The
35,000 foot view.
Exactly. That's
right.
exactly
Now, there's a lot more that goes in to that naturally, but from that 35,000 foot view of, helping keep the balance of ecosystems with the most minimal resources there is to be able to go do that. Limited personnel, limited technology, limited equipment, limited everything else. So learning to do like what we call in the Marine Corps combat multipliers, like, hey, let's add some of these other resources like you were talking about with the beds and the Border Patrol and everybody else working together to try to do that. Is, so what would you say, Danny, is for somebody that identifies, let me break this down 2 questions. One, somebody sees something and they don't know if that's a crime or not when it comes to conservation. where could they go to be like, hey, wait a minute, can you be doing that?
A great question, because people ask, well, what do you want people to do? Well, just what we talked about. We don't want people to engage people they think are violating the law, because that's a bad idea. But if you can get as much information as possible, if it's a land thing, vehicle, description, license plate, people, what do they look like? What are they wearing? All those things that you would have wanted as an officer. And we can relay that immediately to a local game warden, who then can hopefully respond and see if there's anything to it. They may have to do a follow-up. And that's what's important, as if you can get a license plate, or if you're on the water and you can get a TX registration number, you've made this an easier process. Because if a game warden can't get there when the act is occurring, they're going to have to try to do an investigation. And if all you got is two guys in a blue car, I don't even know what color car, we're not going to be able to do any good, right?
Yeah, your hands get a bit tied up.
They do.
And that's so important. Naturally I live in the middle of the city of Fort Worth, so the most exotic thing I see is my cat chasing squirrels. But in Colorado is during the day, I've got these, I think they're called Fat Albert or Prince Albert squirrels, that are gray squirrels with bunny ears on them, right? And I got this big pine tree out in my backyard, and I got the little block up there. He comes up there and eats, and I got all the different birds. So I see that during the day, and then in the evening, I've got all these deer that come through my backyard, and then at night, and I've learned about hummingbird feeders. I got this black bear. He keeps getting a hold of my hummingbird feeder. As a matter of fact, it's been wintertime, so he's been, and I got camera system below my house up there, so I get to watch it, because I was like, what was that noise last night? 'Cause I got up and then it was gone. And it's this bear, and he comes to the front. We got a fox, we got a porcupine down at the end of my driveway. You got all these things that, it's important for that conservation. I'm just using Colorado as an example because I see more of it there based on where that house is compared to where my house is here. And that's one of the magical things of people that come to my house. They're like, what's that down the end of the driveway? And I'm like, well, that's Pete the porcupine. I wouldn't pet him. Right? Or when you're sitting there and we're on the back patio and we got a little fire going in my fire pit there, and you see these bucks come walking through, and I'll show you a quick video when we get done out of here. And they're huge. And people are like, whoa, man, that's really cool. And then when they go, well, there's this, what's that little black critter with the white stripe down the back of it? I was like, you don't want to get close to that one. That's called a skunk,
right.
And they're like, well, what do you do about that skunk? And I said, well, as long as skunk's not bothering me, I don't bother the skunk. And I said, well, first, he's probably going to win that fight anyways. Mm-hmm. But I was like, this is part of the natural habitat around there, where the little tiny chipmunks that are running up and down. And that's the important part, because how could you enjoy, these things that are very cool? Because, for example, take someone that maybe grew up in the concrete city of New York, never left the concrete city of New York. They get to come to Texas, and they're sitting here visiting. The look of surprise in folks of like, what is that animal? And then, you're like, well, that's a coyote. Right. Well, I've heard of coyotes. I've never seen a coyote, or whatever that is. And it's that experience, like you were talking about, if it was even a little green space down here where kids could see birds or butterflies or whatever else. So, as we said, is there's not enough game wardens to go through and do all this, that the purpose of Operation GameThief, or one of the many purposes, is to help educate the citizens here in Texas, and even the visitors here to Texas, to say, hey, help us keep this not only for you, but for your kids and your grandkids and their kids and their kids, that it continues not just till next year, but hundreds of years, from now. And that really does become what I feel is the responsibility of all of us as citizens. However, because Danny hit a good point, if you see a criminal act, report it, don't engage with it, because you probably don't have the training. You don't know if that person's armed or not. You don't know if they maybe got, mental health problems or whatnot. Just you can do more by gathering as much information, as much intel on that as possible, from license plates, heights, color, shoes were they wearing. And I can't tell you. It's like, hey, I had a crime, one of my sex crimes I worked in. Well, I mean, they couldn't identify a lot of things. Now, we had DNA, right? That ultimately, in this case, but the guy was wearing what we'd now call face coverings,
Right.
a mask, right?
Right.
Where we couldn't identify. But the victim had said he was wearing a particular set of shoes. And of course, I was amazed. I was like, well, how did you even know what kind of shoes they were? And had a younger brother who was really into sneakers and stuff like that. And that's how she knew about the shoes. That when we did identify a potential suspect, and we were able to, and I mean, there's a lot more detail that goes into the particular case a long time ago, enough for us to get a search warrant, that when we saw those shoes, and these were a unique pair of shoes, I was like, hey, that helped. Now, there was a lot more pieces of evidence that went into this. We ultimately were able to secure a warrant for DNA and then match the DNA, and sure enough, mystery solved. But even as much detail as possible, was it a blue truck? You didn't catch the license plates, but did it have tinted windows or not? Right.
Right.
Or a big scrape down the back quarter panel, or broken tail light, whatever. So for the audience out there, being able to report, if I hear you correctly, report it anyways. It may not be a crime what they're doing, but if it is, try to gather as much detail so that way it does give that game warden that receives the lead at least a better chance of trying to identify who this person is. And like you said, you're not looking for the person that accidentally shot 16 versus 15 dove or whatever else. You're looking for the people out there that are out there decimating a whole field of dove and then selling them for whatever, wherever, for whatever particular reason or profitability on their part that was against the law, right?
Sure,
That's
absolutely.
correct. Yeah.
I think Chad will agree with that. I mean,
No, you made a good point. The more information you can get, we've often kind of joked. It's not even a joke. Laughed as game wardens and said that a wildlife crime oftentimes is harder to solve than a homicide, because the deer, the squirrel, the fish, the turtle they're stealing, they don't have friends that can talk to us. We don't know what bar they were at 10 minutes ago. There wasn't a camera on the sidewalk to see who was with them when they disappeared. Sometimes that's all we have is some tire tracks and somebody heard a shot and it was midnight. And that's what we've got. And we have to run with that.
And if that deer does start talking to you and give a witness statement,
we've got
we got some other set of problems that we need to discuss.
Exactly. Because it's interesting, like you said, when I have talked to detectives such as yourself, they're very difficult cases. And then you go, okay, so this is your scenario. You hear a shot at midnight, you get a phone call, the guy heard a shot, the gal heard a shot, and they saw square headlights leaving their pasture. Now go solve it. And that's what we get left with sometimes. Yeah. And believe it or not, game wardens solve it.
They do.
I mean, that's the thing. That's the interesting part, but it's because, there again, somebody down the road saw that same truck, and they go,
it was a Bobby
truck
that I saw at midnight.
Exactly. Right? Or, hey, you know what? Pete drives through here every day at 1:30 in the morning because he works at the bread plant. It is that. It's the communities. Texas isn't a public land state. We never have been. We don't have the luxury of our western states where people have places to go. And I'm not condemning private land status in Texas. We're proud of that.
Yeah.
We really are, and we demand that. But with that, there's less opportunities because of urban sprawl that you talk about. And more people are moving from the country into the cities, which gives us less witnesses as to what goes on and less people provide an overwatch over those. So as people move toward urbanization, game wardens are losing some of their alliances in this fight. And we got to maintain that. So people who own, like you were talking about, not to single you out, but people who own houses in downtown Fort Worth, but then they go back to grandpa's land on the weekends, you're vitally important to what we do. And if we can educate people who live here in the city that come back to the rural area, how important those resources are, and while they're gone, we're watching it. And we're going to take care of it. But we need your help.
So I like to wrap all these episodes up with, the amount of just experience both of you have not just in law enforcement and conservation and, being a probation officer, being a school teacher. If you had to go back to 20-year-old self and say, hey, 20-year-old self, there's a lot of things we'd love to tell. I'd probably slap 20-year-old me around and be like, whatever you do, don't go out on this one.
Right.
But if you could go back and talk to a 20-year-old self, and actually I want to do something unique here because we do talk about education on conservation. I'm going to start with you, Danny, and then you, Colonel. What would you tell 20-year-old self, hey, do or don't do this, knowing the journey in life that you had and all the success and, because you got there by never experiencing pain or doing something wrong,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
What would you go back and tell 20-year-old self? And then I want you to follow it up with is, what would you tell a 20-year-old today about conservation and the importance of this?
All right. You started with me and you made this difficult. I'm going to try to answer your question. We've talked about this a little bit. So 20-year self, I would say, and I use this word again, but understand and be intentional with your relationships. Don't take any for granted. And sometimes it may be hard to do, but I mean, it took me a good while to understand how important each interaction with one person might be, right? Because you don't know, and I should have snapped on that, but I'm a little slow. And I say that because my first duty station was in Port Isabel, Texas in 1986. I still communicate with people from Port Isabel, Texas. Now you would say, well, you were pretty intentional with your relationships. No, they were more intentional than me. But that in turn taught me that you have to stay connected with people. And you learn, just like I have with the Colonel. I mean, he was very complimentary of me. I learned as much from him as he learned from me, and so that to me is something that I would go back to myself when I was 18 or 20 and don't be the brash, don't be the, you're the greatest Flash that ever walked from San Angelo into, wherever you've gone, but be more intentional about your relationships with people because they're so important to your life in the future, and not about what you can get out of it, maybe what you can give to people. Right. And so that's what I would say to me if I was 18 and I could go back now and go, hey, smart Alec, slow down a little bit and deepen relationships with people, and understand where they're coming from and how you can help them, how you can help them. Again, you learn more from that, or I always have. And I'm not the best at it. I'm not saying that. But I always learned more from others than they probably ever learned from me.
Okay. And what would you tell a young 20-year-old out there now about OGT?
I would tell them that, again, I fully believe that in Texas, our natural resources will, whether they realize it at 18, and some do and some don't, that it will improve your quality of life. I really do. And again, I tied that all back in, and I'm not intentionally doing that, but it's about relationships. Again, it's about OGT is providing a service that we need your help to help us protect and conserve all of our natural resources, private property rights in Texas, that in 10 years from now, when you take your 1 or 2-year-old out, you can watch that smile on their face when they either see their first squirrel or see their first dove or see their first bird, or, it's just, I mean, as the Colonel said, we're becoming Texas. People are moving toward the urban cities, but they still have to go back out, most of them, into the rural areas to do a lot of activities. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what I'd say.
Yeah.
Just 10 years from now, you're going to see the value in protecting our natural and cultural resources in this state. And they're going to mean something to you. They're going to mean something to your friends. They're going to mean something to your children. They're going to mean something to your children's children. And they're going to be important because you're going to be able to participate in activities that are going to bond you, that are going to bring you closer together, that are going to allow you to sit on the riverbank, not talk about fishing, but talk about school, talk about friends, talk about failures, talk about successes. Let me explain to you, boy. I did this wrong. I'm trying to give you advice. Those are the things that I got. That's what I grew up with. That's why, again, the real passion for that is because it just wasn't about the hunt and the chase. It was about the memories I took away. My uncle, my dad are gone. That's what I have left. And I wouldn't trade those for $10 million. Those are the things I remember. Those are not everything, but they were real special times. They really were, because it was me and them. I had their full attention. Even when I did something stupid, I really had their full attention. But that's what I'd say.
Okay. And Colonel, you had to go back and talk to 20-year-old self and be that the first part. And then the second part, just about what would you tell a 20-year-old who's now going to be entering maybe new into the hunting world and whatnot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I believe I know where you're going. Danny, I don't want to say maybe he gave me the answers 11 years ago and I didn't realize it. So we tend to mirror each other a little bit on what we say. But, if I had to go back to 20-year-old self, always an interesting question. Like you said, there's things I'm not going to say over this podcast that I would go back and go, hey, wait a second, guy. But I will tell you this, what I've learned in the last few years that I wish I'd known is not to shy away or be uncomfortable with uncomfortable situations. I've learned more in my life by putting myself into situations where I kind of stutter step and go, wow, I don't know if I want to have this conversation. I don't know if I want to be in this environment. I don't know if I want to take that challenge. What if I fail? So to learn at the age that I am now, to be confident in myself that when I'm uncomfortable, when I'm in that little edgy space, that means I'm expanding my horizons and I'm learning is very valuable to me, as I sat here today. If I'd known that when I was 20, where would I be at this moment? I know some people may look and go, well, you're the colonel of Texas Parks and Wildlife, and Danny's right. Maybe I am too humble at times about that, but I do go, what impact could I have had that was greater then that I waited until now? So that's what I would say. If I was talking to a 20-year-old now coming into just say conservation law enforcement, getting new into hunting, they're just now discovering this wild places, as Carter Smith says, our wild places and wild things.
I stole that.
Yeah. So
he doesn't have it copyrighted.
Yeah, I know. He got rid of that. But, I would say don't wait for your opportunity. Seize that opportunity. Danny and I talked about that on the way down. What's one of the keys to my success is, and I think I alluded that earlier, when there was a challenge, I raised my hand. I learned that early on to go, hey, okay, I'm going to do that. I just identified now in the last probably 5 years that's that uncomfortableness I'm talking about. And I was craving that because I was learning and I was becoming a better person. But for those that are listening right now, when it comes to conservation law enforcement, you can get involved at any level at any time. You can't wait for somebody else to come along and introduce you to the outdoors. You can't wait for somebody to come along and explain necessarily the importance of conservation and animals. You have to get out there and you have to experience them and you have to enjoy them. And then you're going to grow that passion. If I can help you do that, by all means, look us up on our website. We have recruiting pages. We have Instagram pages. We have Facebook pages. It's not difficult to find a Texas game warden. We can help you do that. I told a group, an audience in Uvalde County at one point in time, My job at that point as a captain is not to keep people off of public waterways. It's to get as many people on that river as I can so that their way of life, that their quality of life, as Danny Shaw said, is enjoyable, that they can have fun in the outdoors. They can experience the things that I took for granted when I was 2 years old, 5 years old, 8 years old, 20 years old. I grew up with it. I take it for granted at times. It was amazing what you just said. Like you said, someone from New York sees a porcupine. It might as well be an alien.
Mm-hmm.
They've never seen one. For me, that's natural. Like you said, nothing. Do I have an excitement about that? Game wardens, and I'm sharing a little here. When I was an intern, I used to do ride-alongs as game warden, and they would chuckle every once in a while because I'd be like, hey, stop, there's a bunch of turtles. And they're like, I see turtles every day. One thing I can tell you about the colonel of Texas Parks and Wildlife Game Wardens right now, I still stop and look at turtles. And everybody, game wardens, I got 551 of them that work hard for Texans. They can laugh at me all day, but I tell you, I can see a nice sunset. I see an animal on the side of the road that I admire. I'm going to stop. And so I'll add to that. If I were to tell myself also, it's exactly what Danny said. Slow down. When you see it, enjoy it. It was put here for you, and we all have to take care of it.
Man. So people want to learn more on TPW. Where do they go? What's the website that they, or is it tpw.org?
Yeah, it is. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't carry it around with me. I tell people at gas stations all the time, I'm like, you know what Google is? I'm like, just type in Texas Parks and Wildlife. You will learn anything you want to know about it.
It'll go right there.
And the reason I say that is it's not difficult to find us, but if they'll go to that main website, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, they'll be introduced to everything we have. We have divisions that will teach you how to kayak. We have divisions that will teach you how to go take photographs of animals. We have divisions that will take you out on hikes. Our state parks division is amazing. We give Texans opportunities to get out into the wild with that at all times. We have park peace officers who protect those parks to make sure they're safe for Texans who doesn't have land to go out to. They can check out our Facebook page under Texas Game Wardens. We have an Instagram page now, which is recruiting that is super beneficial if you're trying to figure out what we do. And those are great sites that you can visit. But we're always there. 4200 Smith School Road is a public place. They can always stop by and visit there as well.
Okay. And Danny, people want to learn more about Operation GameThief. Where do they go? How do they get a hold of you?
They can go to our website. It's ogttx.org. That's where they can go. That's where they can call us. They can find out where we're at. We go to a lot of shows. We love to talk to people.
Can they donate on the site?
They can actually donate on the site. Like I said, we're a 501c3 and that's how we live and that's how we operate is public donations to OGT. And we want to be of service. And I just, you want to call and talk conservation with me, I'd love to talk to you.
And then there's a 1-800 number. Give that
1-800-792-GAME, GAME. They can call that number. That is a direct tip line to the LE dispatchers if you see or believe you've seen a violation of the law.
Okay. And in case you're driving down the road and weren't able to catch all these numbers and websites and everything else, you can always go to www.myexperiencedrealtor.com. That's experience with an ED. Click on podcast, scroll down to Danny Shaw and Colonel Chad Jones, and you can hit the read more button to take direct access. Gentlemen, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
What'd you think?
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Perfect.
You like it? Yeah,
You happy?
smooth. Oh.